is cognitive neuro domain cognitive neuro domain of behavior analysis. Behavior analysis applications are widely needed in the domain of mental healthcare, forensic security, educational environment, or towards social environment. In this context, C-DAC Delhi team is targeted to deploy a multi-model neurophysiological framework for behavioral analysis. The project is being carried out by C-DAC Delhi in collaboration with DRDO and Symbiosis Institute of Technology, Pune. Here, the advanced domain expertise is provided by RML, New Delhi, and Central Forensic Science Lab, CBI, New Delhi. The scope of this project includes the detection of inside threats and the second stage of suspect interrogation for internal security reasons. In fact, this is an anomaly detection problem where normal behavior is manifested via standard EEG, ECG signals, normal heart rate, standard computer interface, and gaze. The neurocognitive AI and extended reality group in C-DAC is developing this AI-ML-based model for acquiring signals and analyze them for the human emotion stress. I think these two projects on the whole, which are not only looking at the cutting edge or the state of the art applications and research, are towards the applications which will impact the society at large. And I'm very happy to know that we have the end users in both these projects who are very closely interacting with the project staff to give them the feedback on how to make the solutions which are more application oriented and towards what the users want. And I am anticipating that these projects will be implemented successfully and will be they will be able to test in real world settings at various end user agencies and also institutions. The neurocognitive AI and extended reality group in C-DAC Delhi is doing a wonderful job. I congratulate them, and I'm hopeful that this webinar will bring together all the like-minded people, and the discussions will steer us to make a better solution that we are targeting, and also to discuss within ourselves of how to move forward, what more can be done in this area for the betterment of especially the children with special needs. So I thank you all for so much for inviting me here, and I wish this webinar all the success. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you very much, ma'am,
for your words. Thank you. So now we do have let me introduce you, let me welcome Dr. Suresh R. Devsham, Professor of Bioscience and Bioengineering at IIT Jammu. Let me give you the brief introduction about the Dr. Suresh sir. So Dr. Suresh sir has completed engineering in electronics and communication from the College of Engineering, Guindy, and MS and PhD in bioengineering from the University of Illinois at Chicago. He was on the faculty as an associate professor at IIT Mumbai from 1990 to 2002, and then a professor at CMS Vellore till 2021. At present, he is a professor of electronics engineering at IIT Jammu. He has done several research work in the area of medical instrumentation, medical signal processing, physiological system modeling, and neuromolecular and rehabilitation engineering. So the paper published in both the engineering and the medical journal. He taught course in medical instrumentation, system modeling, sensors and instrumentation, control system engineering, and his book on medical signals and systems published by Springs is in its 3rd edition. So thanks a lot, Dr. Suresh sir, for being a part and to join our webinar. Dr. Suresh sir, hand over to you for your word.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay, great. And now I have been asked to speak about human-machine interfaces, also called brain-computer interfaces. And I have some slides that I will share with you. I have actually worked with human-machine interfaces, mainly using signals from nerves and muscles. Although I have done a little bit of work with the EEG, I have not done a lot of work with the EEG, but I'll say a little bit about it. I will maybe show you some simulated data of both the EMG and the EEG. We do collect data. So as you understand, I worked in both IIT Bombay and then at CMC Vellore for many years. So I've actually worked with a lot of medical professionals as well as patients. And after I retired from CMC Vellore, I've come to IIT Bombay, where I am doing similar things. So we build our own electronics. So here is one of the boards that my student is working on. So we have a set of amplifiers for various biological signals or biopotential signals. And so we understand some of the difficulties of working with these small signals. So let me share my screen. So since the number of participants is not very large, I thought it can be fairly interactive. So if you have any questions, I can elaborate on what I'm talking about. So I've titled the talk as Human-Machine Interfaces from the EMG to the EEG. I'll start talking about why we need human-machine interfacing. Some of the applications or most important applications of processes control, also for what is called environment control. That means controlling things in the living environment, and for communication, which we all understand that a lot of people with neuromuscular diseases have difficulty also with speaking and sometimes with hearing, seeing, and so on. And therefore, communication for them is difficult. And these include both small children and adults, elderly people, and so on. Then I'll say something about muscle signals, nerve signals, brain signals, how we can acquire the signals, how we can extract some features. I will go into a little bit of detail, because every time we talk about something, if we go into the detail, it helps us to understand what are the pros and cons of those issues. And I'll say a little bit about implantable devices. Implantable devices are likely to take a few years to become widely used for human-machine interfaces. Specifically, I'll speak about electromyography. I'll say why and how we do the electromyogram. And when I talk about the electroencephalogram or the EEG, I'll mainly highlight differences from the EMG. So why brain-machine interfaces? There can be some reason why a human being or an is unable to communicate normally, is unable to do physical activities normally, and so on. So there is absence of normal communication, both in speech, hearing, and also in manipulating the environment. So motor signals to external devices are not present naturally, and therefore we have to supplement it with artificial motor signals. So, for example, if somebody wants to get up and turn on the fan or turn off a light, they cannot do it themselves because they're paralyzed. They have some reason why they are not ambulatory. And the only thing that they may be able to use is signals from their nervous system, because in many cases, certainly not in all cases, in many cases, they will have normal cognitive functioning. That means they can see and understand or understand what is going on around them, although they might see it incompletely, they might hear things incompletely, and so on. So we also may have to supplement what they see and hear, and that is also, in a broader sense, part of brain-machine interfaces, because we want the brain of the person not only to manipulate the environment, communicate with people around them, but also to hear what is going on around them, see what is going on around them, and understand how the environment is changing around them. So the control of prosthesis is one area where brain-machine interfaces have worked reasonably successfully, and the ones that have worked most successfully are the ones that are very easy to use and simple to make, easy to maintain, and so on. So when we go for something that is practically applicable, it has to be easy to maintain. If something is very sophisticated, works very well, but does not work reliably, then it's not going to be a suitable device for deployment. Then people also want good information exchange with the external world. By this, I mean that it may be possible for somebody to have a limited amount of body movement. So somebody with a stroke who is unable to speak may be able to nod their head in response to questions. But that is not sufficient for a lot of activities. So to be able to say complicated things is important. So if we can help that person to control a keyboard and even type out questions, answers, comments, and so on, it will be very, it'll enhance their life as a human being. So when we talk about what kind of movement disability, it's important to understand what it is that they lack. So although I know that all of you said that EEG-based interfaces is what is of interest right now at C-DAC, I think we should understand the problem and see what is the best solution for the problem rather than focus on the technology that we are going to develop. So if you look at movement disability, that makes a person unable to communicate, unable to turn on switches, unable to go from one place to another, unable to go to the toilet, then we know what exactly we have to give them. So the greatest need that somebody might have may be to control a wheelchair, and the person does not have any control over his or her hands and legs. In which case, they cannot control a joystick for an electric wheelchair. They cannot, much less, propel the wheelchair by the hands, as many people with lower limb paralysis are able to do. So in that case, we'll have to see how we can help them to propel a wheelchair, use a prosthetic hand, and so on. And communication for them may not be the most important thing. So what are the kinds of disability that will render them unable to use their hands and legs? Amputation, of course, is the most common, and upper limb amputation is, of course, a disability for their doing things, for their being able to eat food, to do their own toilet easily. Although a lot of people with upper limb amputation that we've seen at CMC Vellore do a large amount of their activity using just their lower limbs. But using the lower limbs presents a cosmetic and social problem. I know people who eat food with their legs because they don't have hands. But then they prefer to do it in privacy, because if they do it in public, then they become the object of curiosity and spectacle. So for them, if we can give them prosthesis and we can help the prosthesis to be controlled by their brain in some direct way, then it becomes a great help for them. Somebody might be paralyzed because of stroke, because of a spinal cord injury, because of birth trauma. And in all those cases, the limb is not missing, but the limb is incapable of being under the control of the brain. And in those cases, you cannot use a prosthetic device. In some cases, you may be able to use an orthotic device to supplement the lack of force or strength in the hands and the legs. But sometimes it seems that it's easier to replace a complete limb rather than to help a not working limb to function. But in the case of a lot of paralysis, an option that is available is to control the muscles using functional electrical stimulation. And but if you have functional electrical stimulation, so that's also something that I and my group have been working on both at CMC Vellore, and we hope to start that in IIT Jammu soon. Doing functional control of muscles that are paralyzed. But there also you need to have the ability to interface the brain successfully, smoothly, easily with the functional electrical stimulation system. Now, I've already mentioned or hinted at the location and extent of disability. I've mentioned a lower limb and upper limb disability. In the lower limb or upper limb also, you can have partial disability. And there again, sometimes partial disability is harder to overcome than complete disability. So somebody who has all 4 fingers missing in a hand cannot easily have a prosthetic hand fitted, because if a prosthetic hand is fitted, then it will extend far beyond the hand with just the thumb. But if somebody has an amputation at the level of the wrist, then it seems that you can fit a prosthetic limb without making it much longer. So, now, there are projects that we have done at CMC Vellore, at IIT Bombay. I know there's a large project that continues now at IISc Bangalore, where people have made prosthetic hands and interface them with the user's intention. So when I say user's intention, that's really the same thing as a brain-machine interface or a human-computer interface. So we have to know, where is the disability? Is it important enough to be provided with a technological solution? Because sometimes solutions can be surgical, sometimes solutions can be orthotic, where you're only doing some passive support. And even in the case of prosthesis, you might give only passive support in some cases. The famous example of that are completely passive legs. So in those cases, you don't have to worry about the human-machine interface so much. But it is nice if you do have human-machine interfaces, so that you can give them more active prosthesis. Sometimes a person might have very limited range of movement. So there are people who have had extensive stroke in the motor regions of the brain, in which case they cannot even, they cannot speak, they cannot move their hands and legs, they cannot move even their mouth sometimes, and unless they have a little bit of movement, you don't even know if they have normal cognition. So in those cases where they are able to move an eyelid, then you can tell that they have normal cognition, because you can ask them to blink their eyes once if they understand what somebody is saying, twice if they agree, 3 times if they don't agree, and so on. And so in that case, what you have available is both, of course, the brain electrical signals and also the movement of this eyelid. If you don't have movement of the eyelid also, it appears that the person is in a vegetative state. You can't tell the difference between somebody in a vegetative state where they have no cognitive understanding and somebody who has cognitive understanding but has no way of communicating outside the body. So if somebody has some motor movement, as I said, like being able to move an eye or an eyelid, or being able to move a mouth without being able to articulate, then you have to consider both taking signals of that movement and taking signals directly from the brain. Taking signals directly from the brain sounds very nice, but often the difficulties associated with it may make it difficult to use regularly. I'll say a little bit about it. Now, sometimes somebody might only have a reduced strength of movement. So there, if you can supplement it, often with orthosis and certainly with functional electrical stimulation, that also needs brain-machine interfaces, and a lot of good can be done in improving the quality of life of such people. So let's look at processes control. The standard way of controlling and completely mechanical processes. When I say processes, I'm talking both about artificial hands and artificial legs. The artificial hands are what are the most dramatic. So now you can get prosthetic hands that have cable control. That means the cable is attached to the opposite shoulder, and by moving the shoulder, you can get the hand to open, close, the elbow to flex, and so on. So here, if you see this, then it will make you think, because at the most you can get one or two movements from the shoulder, and you have to use those one or two movements to do a lot of functions. You have to because you would like to do multiple functions like open the hand, close the hand, turn the wrist, bend the elbow, and that's not even counting being able to move the index finger separately from the middle finger and the third finger, the little finger, and so on, so that you can do a huge number of complex activities. If you have an electromechanical hand, that means a motor-driven hand, which is what a lot of people are developing these days, then you can have some kind of a switch control. I know people have talked about voice control, and when I was at IIT Bombay, some students said we can have voice control for an artificial hand, and they did some prototypes. But when I went to CMC Vellore, we found that the first thing that many of the amputees said is, we don't want to be seen in public talking to our hand, because that is socially a very great problem. And therefore, voice control is certainly not the preferred way of controlling artificial hands and legs. But switch control is not to be ruled out, because if you can control a switch by moving your head, by blinking an eye, it's worth thinking about. By moving your head, you can attach a joystick to the back of your head, and you can control, say, a mouse cursor on a screen if the person does not have speech and hand movement. So it's important to work with a group in AIMS in Delhi. And I know there is a good rehabilitation and physical medicine group that has grown in the last 20 years. So if you work with them, you will understand what is acceptable to patients, what is easy for patients who are paralyzed, who have various neuromuscular problems, and so on. And at the outset, that should be part of the problem definition. What is the group of people that you're going to address? Because you can't say we will address all kinds of people. There is no such thing, because you can't say we will address people with stroke, we will address people with birth trauma, we will address people with spinal cord injury, we will address people with amputations, because that's a vast range of people, and all of them need brain-computer interfaces. But they can have different kinds of brain-computer interfaces to enrich their quality of life. And along with this, if you're going to have any kind of processes control, the user would like to have feedback from the processes. The famous example is if they're going to pick up a cup of hot tea and drink it. Normally, what we do is, if the cup itself is very hot, then you know that you shouldn't take it to your mouth because you don't want to burn your lips and your tongue. Now, when a person is using an artificial limb to pick up a cup, can you give information about the temperature? Can you give information about the hardness of the cup? Because using a natural hand, you can tell whether it's a good paper cup or one of those very weak and flimsy plastic cups. Because when it's on the table, it looks like, it is stable enough. But as soon as you pick it up, and if you apply too much force, you're going to end up crushing the cup. Now, in the natural hand, as soon as you pick it up, you know when the cup is slipping, you know when the cup is flexing and collapsing too fast, and then you adjust your force accordingly. Now, this kind of feedback is also important for users of such prosthesis. Okay. So interfacing with the central nervous system, you need to interface both for the motor control of the environment and for sensory awareness of the environment. So the different methods are muscle recording. You can pick up muscle signals. You can also present information to the tactile sensors on the skin over the muscles. So you can have both movement interfaces, force interfaces, you can have electrical interfaces. The electrical interface is the myoelectric signal. In the case of the brain recording, you can have EEG, which is scalp recordings. You keep electrodes on the scalp and pick up the signals. In a few cases, it may be possible, it may be convenient to place the electrodes under the skull on the dura of over the brain and record directly from them. You have some advantages in doing that because your signal quality will be much greater than if you keep it outside the skull and on the scalp. In a few more rare cases, you can even place electrodes inside the brain. In the about 40-50 years ago, in the 1970s, people have experimented with placing electrodes on the surface of the brain as well as deep inside. And mistakes were made and a lot of learning has taken place. Now, for normal brain-computer interfaces, placing electrodes inside the brain is not done routinely. There are cases where you can place electrodes inside the brain for the purpose of controlling diseases, like movement disorders like Parkinson's disease. There are, again, in the past cases where people have tried to control other both motor and cognitive diseases using electrodes implanted in the brain. And as I said briefly, mistakes were made and a lot of things have been learned. Now we have learned to do things much more cautiously. A famous set of trials were done about now 45 years ago is to place visual prosthesis by stimulating the visual cortex, and electrodes were placed in the brain under the skull. That means on the visual cortex itself directly. So this is just to, for the sake of completeness, to give you an idea of the different things that are available, that are possible, and that can be done. That's why I mentioned cortical recording is a possibility. And I expect sometime in the next 30-40 years, maybe sooner, we will see better quality of cortical recording that is suitable for brain-machine interface. Then nerve recording is somewhere in between muscle recording and brain recording. And for prosthesis control, that has attracted a lot of attention. There is a group in Italy. There are some groups in the US, some groups in Australia, and a few other groups in Europe that have looked at nerve recording, where you can place a small cuff directly over the nerve, so that the amount of information that you can get from the nerve is much greater than what you can get from the muscle, and much easier than what you can get from the brain. And arguably, if you can record from the nerve, you can get data, information that is almost as rich as what you can get from the brain, as it arguably, and given the right, the current technology. The problem with nerve recording is both the techniques where you put a cuff electrode around the nerve and or electrodes that are inserted into the nerve. I'll just draw a picture quickly here. So you can, if you have a nerve like this. So if you have a nerve like this, a cuff electrode is to place a cuff like this around the nerve, and the electrodes are on the inner surface of the cuff. And this goes to a set of amplifiers all of which have to be implanted, and you can record from the nerve. The intrafascicular electrodes are, you have the nerve, and the nerve, you have electrodes that are inserted into it. And this electrode has multiple recording surfaces, and this again goes to an amplifier and you record. It might go to multiple amplifiers if you have multiple electrodes. So here also you might go to multiple amplifiers if you have multiple electrodes. So these are recording techniques that are possible. As I said, these boards that we use are general purpose biopotential amplifiers and digitizers. I'll say a little bit about this as I go along. So examples of motor deficit are lower limb amputation, lower limb neuromuscular accident, trauma, disease, all of which will come under neuromuscular deficit. Upper limb amputations, upper limb neuromuscular deficit, again, can be because of trauma. The most common cause for upper limb neuromuscular deficit as well as lower limb neuromuscular deficit is spinal cord injury. Spinal cord injury, I think, as of now, the most common cause of spinal cord injury are road traffic accidents. Earlier, it used to be agricultural accidents when people fell down from trees and broke their spine. In between, it used to be the most common cause was industrial accidents, where people fell down or were hit by machinery in industries. But now, as you all know, roads have become an epidemic of accidents. And so a lot of these people with spinal cord injuries are surviving, and therefore they are paralyzed after the spinal cord injury. And if you know which are the muscles that are affected, you can see how you can restore the function. Restoring the function, again, since we are talking mainly about brain-computer interfaces, you can restore the function by electrical stimulation, you can restore the function by a motorized orthosis, by electromechanical, pneumatic actuators, and so on. But all of them have to be controlled by the will or intention of the person. They have to be controlled by what the person is thinking, what the person wants, and so on. And therefore, the brain-computer interface is of primary importance in all of these. The last pathology that I wish to mention is spasticity, which often happens both because of a cerebrovascular stroke and because of birth trauma. In the case of birth trauma, the class of disease of pathology is called cerebral palsy, because the injury in both these cases, that means stroke as well as birth trauma resulting in cerebral palsy, the problem is an injury to the brain because of bleeding, because of lack of blood supply, because of hyper bilirubin in the blood, and various cases. So the problem is an injury in the brain, and that results in not only lack of control of the muscles of the hand, the legs, and so on, but it can also result in hyperreflexia, which makes it much more difficult to control those muscles. But this is something we have to be aware of, because some of those people might also have cognitive difficulties, in which case your brain-machine interface has to have a lot of safety features incorporated in it. I think I am taking a lot of time giving the preliminaries. Let me go quickly through some of the electronic devices for communication and control in rehabilitation.
Suresh, sir, I would like to just interrupt a little bit.
Yeah.
Actually, sir, at 3 o'clock, we do have one more speaker. So I would request you kindly
I will conclude in the
wrap
next
it
5
up.
minutes.
Yeah, in like 5 to 10 minutes, please.
I'll stop at 3 because I have another meeting at 3. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. So you can conclude in a 5 minutes. That is not an issue.
I will do that.
It will be a great knowledgeable thing.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
So let me go through this quickly. So there are a lot of devices that you can easily make. When I say easily make, that means there is a great need for it, and you can make you can modify, say, a remote control that controls light switches, music systems, computers, and so on, to an interface that connects those devices to the brain and intention of the user who has a motor deficit. So if you you might also have a person who's in a wheelchair who wants to turn on a water tap to be able to fill a mug because they're not able to reach a water tap and so on. So all these, there are electromechanical devices for it, light switches that the person wants to control. So I'll go through this quickly. So sometimes if you have, as an example, n number of positions that you can control with your fingers, with your hand, and you want to replace that with a brain-machine interface, you'll have to see how many states your brain-machine interface can have. So in other words, how many bits of information that your brain-machine interface can deliver to the machine. And depending on the number of bits you have, you will have to either time multiplex or do some kind of multiplexing so that you control all the devices that you want to control with just those limited number of control. I'll not go through this in detail just now for want of time. I'll say a little bit about biopotential recording. What I will do is, in the case of biopotential recording, you have to use some electrodes to pick up the signal, connected to amplifiers. The amplifiers will have some analog processing to remove unwanted noise and transmit only the required signal. And then almost always we will digitize it today. So after you digitize it, you'll have to extract some features. Again, I'll go through these quickly. What I will do is maybe I'll show you some samples of how EMG and EEG look. And there are various features you can extract from these signals. So I'll go through all of this quickly. So EMG acquisition, it's worth just mentioning this. The electrodes that are used go to an instrumentation amplifier. The electrodes that are used should not have any polarization of the electrodes, because if you have polarization, your signal can easily drive the amplifiers into saturation. And therefore, you should use electrodes that are non-polarizable. And the commonly used non-polarizable electrodes are silver with a coating of silver chloride. And that's because most biological fluids have some fluoride ions in them. And therefore, if you have silver chloride on the surface of the silver electrodes, then the silver chloride, and the chloride in your sweat, in whatever is in your body, is going to be in chemical equilibrium, and therefore the potentials will not change because of chemical reactions that are taking and creating products of those chemical reactions. That's a very brief introduction to the electrodes. Then your analog processing, in the case of EMG, the required bandwidth is 220 Hertz to about 400 Hertz. And therefore, you can have a high-pass filter and a low-pass filter to have this band. The digitization, now almost most of the time, you will have digitization of about 10 bits, 12 bits, or even 16 bits is possible easily for EMG and EEG and ECG if you want to include it. And the sampling rate, you can tell from the analog bandwidth, the sampling rate should be about 1000 Hertz or greater. Okay. In the case of the EMG, you can do simple things like rectified mean value. I have some, so here I have a cartoon of what you record as the EMG. You place electrodes on the skin over the muscle, and you process that. Then here I have the the anatomy of what is inside the muscle and what are the signals coming from the nerves itself. So this is to say that one of the things that I myself work on is to make mathematical models of the physiology, so that the analysis method gives us some draws on information from the signals that are coming from the brain. Okay, so these are all models of how the electromyogram is generated in the body, and this is more of that. So these are to say that the electrodes themselves will determine the band of frequency that you get, and again you can show this mathematically. So these are actually calculated values. So if you change the depth at which you're recording the signal, if you change the width between the electrodes, if the signals themselves have a different spatial velocity, all of them will result simply in a change in the bandwidth of the signal. So these graphs on the right side are frequency spectra. So the vertical axis is the power in the signal, and the horizontal axis is the frequency. The pictures on the left side are the time signals. Okay. Oh, it's already 3 o'clock. Can I stop here?
Yes, sir. I would ask you, sir, to conclude the presentation. Actually, sir, we do have a limited time.
Yeah. So I will stop here. Sorry, I lost track of time. If you want me to show a simulated electromyogram, I can take a minute.
Absolutely, sir. Okay. Yes, sir. Sure. You can show the simulation.
Okay, so here you have a screen with multiple panels. So just look at the bottom two panels on the right side. So what I have here, so the middle top panel shows a cartoon of a hand with a muscle, and I can change the amount of force in the muscle by using the slider. And what you see here is the EMG that is generated. Okay, and those of you who have seen EMG signals, I know a lot of people both in AIIMS and CMC Vellore have seen my simulations, and we have compared this with actual recorded EMG, and we have reason to believe that the simulation is fairly accurate. Now, what I have also wanted to show is the common way of analyzing the EMG for the reason of controlling a human-machine interface is to use a demodulator, and the term used by physiologists is the mean rectified value. And from an engineering perspective, it is only a demodulation of the signal so that we get an idea of the force or the intention of the person's brain. So here on the bottom right, I show the rectified mean EMG, and let me again show it to you. Okay, that is a rectified mean EMG, which is a demodulated version, of the EMG. One more thing which is worth showing is you can also look at the spectrum. So I have the spectrum calculated on the right side. So I can choose my analysis method, and the spectrum changes depending on the way I change the amount of EMG that is generated. So what I have used to calculate the spectrum is what is called the short-time Fourier transform. And the short-time Fourier transform, as I mentioned earlier, we have to understand the recording technique as well as the way the EMG is physiology works, because some of those also contribute to the shape of the spectrum. Okay, I'll stop here. Sorry for not planning my time, man.
It's fine, sir, not an issue. So thanks a lot, Dr. Suresh, to be part of this webinar and providing much valuable and knowledgeable information toward the BCI. And also again, I would like to thank you for providing the simulation for our speakers and our guests and the students who have joined this webinar. So thanks a lot, sir,
Thank
for
you.
your.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Excuse
Thank
me,
you.
I have to leave. I have another meeting.
Okay, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so we will continue from here, guys, and we do have one more speaker toward this webinar. So let me welcome to Professor Arvindo Rotre, sir, Professor of Bioscience and Bioengineering at.
No, I am electrical
Sorry,
engineer.
sorry, sir. I just got little bit. Sorry. Just give me 1 second. Okay. Apologies for my misplaced things. Okay, so let me welcome Arvindo Rotre, Professor Electrical Engineering from IIT Kharagpur. So, Professor Arvindo having a 30-year of experience in teaching, research, consultancy, and product development. The primary focus of his research is to develop fast and accurate algorithms for signal detection, classification, information retrieval, and then implementation on a portable platform. Many of the lab model were converted to product prototype. The major research interests are in the area of human monitoring and the machine diagnostic and prognostic. He has also founded 5 startup companies to launch various products. One of his startup is connected to organic cow-based farming in rural area. So thanks a lot, Professor Ravindo, to being a part of this webinar. And I would kindly request you can start your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I have 40 minutes. Am I audible clearly?
Yes, sir, you are clearly audible.
Okay, so there will be some noise. Please forgive me for that. So I
Okay,
shall
sure,
be interested in interactive section. My time is for 40 minutes. So I shall present quickly about the things in 25 minutes or so. Then the remaining 10 minutes I would like to keep for discussions. So you can ask questions. I can respond to that because it is not possible to bring out any theory and tell you something. So let me share my
Yes,
screen.
sir.
We have been developing products related to human monitoring. So I am going to
Arvind, sir, I
yeah.
just wanted to interrupt here just for 1 second. For the guest, please, I would kindly request you if you're having any query in middle of session, please write your query in the chat box. So after the session, Arvind sir can explain or can answer your query. So that's the thing, sir. You can continue, sir. Thank you.
So at the outset, because we have been building a lot of products, so about 50 of them we have been already have built, and there are about another 50 in the pipeline. So they are out of them, many are related to human monitoring. So I shall show you a demo of a particular recent lab prototype which we have been developing. So please have a look and let me know if it is. Sorry, I once again I'll share. There is some issue there, so I'll share again.
No issue, sir.
So is it visible?
Yes, sir. It's visible.
So this is a product related to, we call it smart yoga mat. So this is related to stress, anxiety, and depression, and minimization of this. So SAD, we call it SAD, stress, anxiety, and depression. So this will induce relaxation. At the same time, it will measure also relaxation. So this is a product which is based on this idea, as you can see here. So this is a mat where you have to do your relaxation on based on an animated video. Then there are non-invasive monitors like visual camera, thermal camera, and FMC radar. So it will monitor your breath rate, heart rate, facial expression, blood flow patterns, and it will give you a relaxation index. So look at this lab prototype. We call it AI Yogi. So these are the different thermal image, radar signal, visual image. So while you do relaxation, the sensor data will analyze your breath rate, heart rate, and also the facial blood patterns to give you whether you're achieving relaxation. So this is the box. The prototype we are doing now, second tier, that is commercializing it. We have done experiment with a lot of young people at IIT Kharagpur. So this is how you unbox. This is lab prototype, so there are a lot of things which has to be minimized. So he's checking, first you will check the sensors, thermal and radar and visual, whether they are working or not. Visually
Sir,
use
do you
the
use
physical.
Arduino? Sir, do you use Arduino?
No. This is totally different, not Arduino. This is 32 bits processing. So a lot of 8-bit. So let me finish this.
Okay, sir.
So this is myself. I have given a demo. This will be animated actually. So this exercise which I'll do, it will be quickly presented to you. It's a simple relaxation technique which will come on the screen, and not myself or any human being. Then that animated from you have to follow. If you make any errors, etc., it will also detect. This is very quickly getting presented. Actually, it is not so quick. So this will do a few things. First is the posture analysis based on the visual input, whether you are doing the exercise properly or not. See this errors which is detected. So this is the facial blood flow when it is sitting straight. So this gives you facial blood flow pattern. So They show the calmness from finding out the thermal blood flow patterns. So you can see post relaxation, you can see the nose has substantially cooled down because of long deep breathings. You can see the cheeks are cooled down. If you look pre-relaxation to post-relaxation, there is a lot of cooling down. Blood flow pattern has reduced. That means you are relaxed. So you can, it gives you the thermal analysis. So this is the radar signal which gives you the heart rate and breath rate. So this gives you heart rate and breath rate pattern. So from this you can see it is coming down. The heart rate is coming down as you can see. So towards the end the heart rate comes down. So that means relaxation is happening. So then we put it back. So you could see this is one product where you had a look questions on this. Actually, I would like to check any questions. This prototype is ready. We are going to the second tier, TRL7. This TRL6 is there. So TRL7, we have to package it very nicely and go for collaboration so that we can market it. So any questions on this? Anybody has any questions you can ask? Hello? Am I audible?
Audience can please start asking questions.
Yeah, am I audible? So I shall, if there is no questions, then I will go and share the presentation. Already I have spent around 10 minutes. So I will have 10-15 minutes more. So I shall be basically talking about a few things. I have been working in this field in 2004. So we have started with cognition, then attention, then sleep, emotion, then relaxation, and then validation through EEG. So that is our work. So I shall be sharing a few of these things. So because it is not possible to share everything. So I'll start with cognition. Is my screen visible? Hello, is my screen visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So I will present in this mode. Let me do one. Okay. So still is it visible, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So these are some of the things. So I'll start with cognition, the research in cognition. Actually, this work which I'm presenting, it is work by several research scholars, at least 20 to 30 of them who have graduated from IIT Kharagpur, and it is their work. I am just a supervisor. So all with due regards to the respective scholars, I am presenting this. So let me start with cognition. So we started our research with cognition. So because of an accident in Kolkata by a driver who slept. So then there are several accidents because of plane crashes because the pilot slept. So we started this work in 2004-2005 very early. So we did a lot of work on cognitive loading, cognitive functions, etc. And we mainly focused on this automotive driving, locomotive idling, aircraft flying, and industrial control. These are the things which we focused on, and a few work which have done with defense on the cognitive modeling of the soldiers. So these are all details. I don't want to get into this. Cognition is related to short-term memory and recognition. So we'll see what we have done. So primarily we have several channels. Example, there will be brain waves, eye movements, facial expressions, dermic activity like your muscle activity, voice patterns, pulmonary activity. But primarily they are very difficult to measure. So we focused on the eye, and we validated this with respect to the brain waves. So we have focused on our eye movement patterns. Later on, we have shifted to radar and other heart rate and respiration rate. So we basically we have done research, considerable research on eye movements to collect ocular parameters. There are different kinds of ocular parameters like saccades, work loss, blink rate, etc. We have used them to build our products. So I will show you one such product, which you will appreciate. You can see me. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
This is my picture. I am wearing that ocular glass, which is a glass fitted with 3 electrodes. You can see there is electrode in the middle, and there are sides electrode, and there is a signal processing unit. It's very small battery, so it will keep on. So what you do is wear this glass and interact with a cell phone to play a video game, which will give you the immediate measure of your eye parameters and tell you how alert you are. So this is used for pre-screening of the pilots. It can be used for also pre-screening of the locomotive drives. So let me go back to the presentation. So yeah. So if you look at, these are the different parameters which, like, brain waves, eye movement, facial expressions, thermic activity, etc. So we basically went for the eye movements. So there are some sclera coils. We don't use them. We basically went for the EOG, electrooculogram, and video oculogram. They are the two things which we used to do our system development. So different cases of eye movement, you can see eyeball movement, eyelid. So fixations are the ones where you fix your eyeball to read something. Eyeball, saccades, very quick movement of eye, vergence, moving towards the same, either converging or diverging. Then rolling, you roll your eye. Then vestibular ocular movements. So then eyelid movement, blinks and prolonged eye closure, perclus. So these are some of the parameters we are going to measure. So you can see this is a EOG signal. Whenever you blink, there is a artifact. So this blink is measured. Whenever you move the eye, also there is an artifact. So I'm captured form of text, and then it is analyzed. I'm not getting into details. If you are interested to know more about it, please write to me. I'll share the details. So then we validated this. So we are interested to find out the cognition and drowsiness. So we did lots of experiments. So we asked them, and we used our psychomotor test like Stroop test, letter counting test, VRT, that is visual response test, and auditory response test, ART. So we did it, and at the same time we recorded the eye parameters. Then we validated with each other whether our device is working with very good accuracy. Finally, we brought out the products. So I'm getting into this. So let me just bring out the ART, visual response test, which is done by psychomotor test. This is a auditory response test, just to validate, letter counting test, then Stroop test. So these are used to validate our product, which is developed based on the ocular parameters. So I can show you those products. Yes. Basically, your eye parameter give you a signal whether the driver is drowsy or not. So phone, mobile computer, which is this one is a total complete computer with IR LEDs, as you can see. So this is fitted on a car, in my car, and we Then this is operator. That means if in an operating environment, in a control room, suppose the driver gets drowsy, then we have a distributed computing, distributed measurement to find out the operator drowsiness detection system. This you can remember the Chernobyl disaster, where there are a lot of people died because the operator committed a mistake. So so this is called odds or operator drowsiness detection system. Then you have a glass-based wearable thing that is called go-no-go system for pilots in a defense establishment. When in Air Force, particularly Indian Air Force, the pilots are very good. They are very rare because of their reaction time. But when they want to fly an aircraft, they are not so alert because this is not war time. So they commit mistakes and they eject themselves whenever they can. So a lot of money is lost. So they wanted to be tested. DRDO wanted to build this product for them. So this is based on SACED, and we call it go-no-go system. You wear this device and play a psychomotor game. It will tell you whether you're alert or not. Then we have this wireless. That means we don't have wire. We have Bluetooth communication. We call it wireless go-no-go. And finally, this is based on video. That means very high-speed camera with 200 fps, where you can do the monitoring. So I think I should take a break here, and I'll get back to you for some questions. Otherwise, it will be too much, webinar, people sleep generally. I know it very well. So therefore, unless there is interaction, there is no fun in teaching.
Yes, sir. So this is very, very much interactive, very interesting, and very important aspect. Means there are so many questions, so many things we need.
Any questions?
Yeah. Sir, I'll start with one question.
Whether people are alert or not, I don't know. Listening or not.
Yes, sir.
So I would like to just add one point, ma'am, that you can refer the chat box, sir. There is one question from
you please
Dr.
go
Rohit.
Papu, you go ahead.
Yeah.
Question answer with the audience. Then later I'll ask my question.
Yes. How much
Yes,
results will be differ from traditional monitoring and radar monitoring of vitals like heart rates? Yes, there is 90. See, if the radar is very near, the results will be very accurate. So the placement of radar is important. Also, if there are metallic objects around, there will be error. So while putting a radar, we have to be extremely careful about the environment. First of all, there should not be many people, number one. Number two, there should not be a lot of metallic objects, because that will metallic object, and definitely there will be error, lot of error. But at the moment, what we see in the conditions which are doing 95% accurate, it is almost accurate. Heart rate is very accurate. Respiration rate is very accurate. Heart rate overrides the respiration rate. So there is little error in heart rate. But the trend, the heart rate variability, etc., are coming perfect. Yes, any other question?
Yes, sir. I needed to understand a bit about the simulating environment, like when we are doing this kind of experiments. So you already informed about the spook test and the color test and an auditory test. So when we are doing that behavioral analysis, kind of using GSR and EOG and many other HRV things. So how, if you can explore on one of the simulated environment for getting stimulated generated, that would be useful for us.
So what we do is, thank you. So we develop first of all, we first develop an app for doing this truth test and visual response test. The app is embedded on your tab. So this is your attention. Let me do for cognition. Attention speed. Yeah, here. Yes, here it is. You can see these are systems which are built. So what happens when you start doing experiment, you are switching these applications. And you are doing this test on the tab. So what will happen? This glass will be synchronized with this. So you will have all these ocular parameters like saccade, blink, opening, closing of eye, everything is recorded. And you get a score from the standards test. These are standard psychological tests, VRT, auditory response test. These are all standards, letter counting test, Stoops test. So you will get a cognitive ability from this. Then so there, because it will test your memory, also the decision making capability, both. So this will give you some idea about the cognition. There will be a score, and we will match with the score which you get. Like for example, saccade. Saccade is, if you are very attentive, the saccade will be very quick. Saccadic peak saccade will be both peak saccadic velocity will increase and saccadic duration will reduce. Similarly, if you are alert, a blink will not be much. So these things are correlated with this. We have done this because this has been already published and patented. So we have done this. So if you want more information, I can share the documents with you.
That would be grateful, sir. Thank you very much.
Yes,
sir.
yes. Thank you.
There is one more question in chat box from Hemant
Whether stress
Jian.
can be identified from thermal image. Yes, that is a good question. I have not come to that. There is a good question. I have not come to that. Actually, we have a presentation on this. So, to stress directly. Yeah, I can go to. I'll go one by one. Better to go one by one. Otherwise, there will be. I can do it so because one by one. So let me go to attention. So from cognition, we did something on attention because attention is related to learning. So we developed two devices called Rujan and Pehchan for finding the attention of each of the students in a classroom. So this will find out the attendance and as well as attention. So we have defined some attention. We have made some, attention index computation. So like which is regularity, attention index, and this career selection index. So this is called overall performance index of a particular kid, maybe class kid or maybe IIT students, whatever. So what we did is we did two things. We took the attendance and also we did the face recognition and facial expression analysis. So this we call it. So from this we derived these indices. My classroom. This is my classroom. So I am taking pictures in this classroom by two ways. One is I can just switch on the iPhone or some phone apps and I tell them I'm taking attendance. I just move around the class and record the videos. Or this is for just attendance. Or I can do a PTZ camera completely fixed in back of my lecture hall so that it will periodically focusing and defocusing on each of the students. It will create an album for attendance. Also, it will basically annotate the facial expression and the gaze of the student to know the attention. So this led to a lot of image processing like face quality analysis, then face recognition. So a lot of this. So finally, it has been implemented and Pehchan. So these are the original image, query image, then features are done here. What is already implemented in we did the facial expression analysis and the face recognition. So we call it Rujan and Pehchan. So these two devices we have built. So this is to find out the attention. So you can see there is a PTZ camera here, which is connected here, which will go back and forth. It will monitor.
Sir, it seems you are showing something on the screen. Is it? Because nothing is visible on the screen, sir.
Yeah. I'm sorry about it. Actually, I forgot to share the screen or something. I have shared the screen. Yes. So can you see my screen now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry about it. So whatever I told, so this is an attention of the kids. Basically, we have done for learning. We created something called an attention index, which is related to some performance index, which is regularity, attention, and career selection. These are the three. So career selection means what these kids want. So this will be all ERP stuff. So regularity comes from attendance and attention comes from facial expression and gaze direction. So we measure all of them. So let me show you my classroom. This is my classroom. So we have a camera on the back, so which will continuously monitor this class and create a facial album from time to time and analyze the facial expression by making a one-to-one correspondence with a particular student. So this needs a lot of things because there will be poor illumination, there will be face rotation, etc. So you have to do considerable facial recognition analysis. So we have done that. At least 3 people have done PhD, and they have come up with these solutions. So if you look at this, this is the thing. So there is the original image. So you do feature selection, deep learning, all things. So if you look at this camera, you can see it's a small PTZ camera, which will be in the classroom. See here, it is put just above the blackboard. This is the model of the classroom we have put here, and it will continuously monitor the face and facial expressions. So from which you know the attendance as well as attention. So that this is about attention. Okay, you can see we have tested our different algorithms. So the head count, etc. we have done. So this is Rujan and Pechan. We call it Rujan and Pechan.
Sir, one small query from my side.
Any questions?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Am I
sir.
audible, sir?
Yes, yes.
Sir, what is the quality of the camera, sir, which you have placed over there?
That
Because
quality is not good. You are very right. So we actually did with a high quality camera first, and this quality camera is low cost because the high
Okay.
quality camera is not affordable. That is around 2.5 lakhs. The PTZ camera,
Okay.
which gives very good quality thing. But the one which I put is around 15,000. So there is a quality issue there. So we are now negotiating with some companies so that the quality issue will be resolved. So here the quality we can go up to a length of, let's say, about 100 students. That is okay. 100 students in a classroom, we can do that. But if it is 200, 250 students, then we need that high quality camera. But it
Okay.
will work. Camera
Thank you, sir.
sensor. Okay, so then if there is no other questions, so let me go to sleep. So from attention, so cognition, we went to attention, then we want to go to sleep. So I shall. So this is our very good research we did. We did very good products, two products. One is based on a radar, which we developed something like 10 years back. 10 or maybe 9 years back. Our first product in the world, product, we call it Sleep-DAC. So there is a company, M-Breath, we created. So this sleep monitor was done there, everything from the scratch. So this was used to control the temperature of the air conditioner, and then control the environment, then give you the sleep quality in the end. So this was essentially developed with respect to a mosquito net air conditioner, which you built on the mosquito net. So what happens there, the temperature cools down. Therefore, when you sleep, the temperature should not cool so much because the body temperature automatically drops. So we did the sleep sense by a pressure cloth. So the pressure, once you sleep inside, the air condition is on, but after some time when you sleep, the air condition will be, the temperature will increase. When the temperature increases, actually you don't feel uncomfortable, and also you don't develop cold or things like that. So it can be used for kids. Then from pressure, we went to radar. So radar means non-invasive. So the Sleep-DAC came out. So if you look at this device which you see here is Sleep-DAC, first prototype. This one which you see, it is like a bedside lamp. So once you keep it there, everything will come in your mobile app, your sleep score, everything. So this was a very successful product. But our mistake was we went from B to C, that means the business to customer. It was very difficult to capture individual customers because mostly customers are not interested to monitor themselves. So therefore, it was a failure. Then we are now trying to B to B. So this is called Sleep-DAC of the first
workshop.
Yes. Any questions? Any questions? Any questions here? Any questions, sir?
I think, sir, someone was unmuted his mic.
Okay,
So-
okay. So this was the software, hardware, everything we did, and I thought it was a fantastic. We won many awards on this product. So, but unfortunately, the student who built it, research scholar, he became ill, and finally he has to withdraw. So it was a good product, I should say. Then we did a thermosleep. Thermosleep means by using thermal imaging. We call it thermosleep, which will be a small thermal camera which will go above you, and you will be sleeping. So it will capture your breath rate from your nostrils. So then it can give you a sleep score. It will also simultaneously capture your facial blood flow pattern, from which you can find out the dreams and deep sleep and dream sleep, nightmares. So you have any sleep related problems. So this is a product which will give you deep analysis of the sleep state. So we did not go much forward on this thermosleep because of the occlusion problem. So this is about sleep. We did a lot of work, at least 3 PhDs, I think. Yeah, 3 PhDs, they are graduated with sleep. We have validated everything with respect to EEG. So I think I am done with 3 things: cognition, attention, and sleep. So anything else you want, or you want to ask some questions? You can ask some questions.
Guys, please ask question. So we do have a little bit limited time, like we do have
Yeah,
one
yeah,
more
we have.
speaker.
Yeah, I know. I have little time.
Yes, sir.
So either you
Yes.
ask questions, or I can just somebody ask about stress. I'll go for 1 minute on stress. So stress is basically the stress, anxiety, and depression. These are the three things. Stress is required sometimes, because to do work without stress will not do. If there would not have been stress, I will not have been actually presented this to you. So it is positive, but at the same time, extreme thing this continues. So it continues, that turns into like anxiety and then depression, something like that. So it's called sad in our language. We did quite a bit of experiments, but we have always psychologists and psychiatrists in our panel. We use speech, thermal image, EEG, heart rate, everything to measure stress. So we did lots of experiments in our IIT, because IIT is just like a excellent place for research and education. It is also an excellent place of stress. So therefore, we have a lot of subjects which are under stress. So we measured a lot of things. You can see this experiment particularly we did with criminals in Medinpur Medical College. There are a lot of pickpockets. So we invited them, around 30 to 40 of them. We secretly recorded their thermal and audio. So a lot of data with us. So I think I will not take much time now, because it is almost 40 minutes, not 40 minutes, but you have other speakers to go. So I'll stop here. If you have any questions, you can ask me right now, or you can send a mail whenever you can.
I would like to thank you, sir, because before Pappu will start speaking his things, this is just an eye opener for us. There are lot many things and lot many extensive research you have done, and definitely we need to learn a lot from you. So definitely
Not me. My scholars have done. Actually, I am benefited.
In your supervision, sir. In your supervision. So, sir, we also need your guidance. We will be connecting you, sir, offline.
Anytime. I am open.
Sir.
Everybody wants to connect it to Delhi. Okay. So anyway, so you guys, if you have any questions, I think Priyanka madam is having my email ID, everything. So she will share with you. I can pass on any information, any help. So welcome. Okay. Thank you very much.
So just wanted to add one more, that there is one more question from Dr. Rohit in a chat box. I would request you to
snoring
answer
problem.
that.
It's a very good question. See, we are doing the sleep monitor, but for snoring problem, then we'll suggest two things. One is called, we have two relaxation techniques. One is called one kind of, how to sleep. That is a relaxation we have. And we have one breathing exercise relaxation. So we'll advise them to do those relaxation before sleeping. So if you detect too much snoring and things like that, otherwise you'll go to the doctor. We are not doctors. So sleep doctors, generally, they are very much occupied. They cannot really give a time. So, but these devices will help them to monitor you very closely and advise.
Yes, sir. So I again request everyone, like if you're having any question, you can write that in a chat box.
Okay, Ardi.
Okay, so I hope there is no
thank you
question,
very
right?
much. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I am honored really to speak. Thank you, Priyanka. Thank you, Pappu Sahab. So I am very much happy that you have given this. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, sir, giving such a wonderful presentation and demonstrating certain videos over here about the products and all toward the BCI, and which is helpful in our webinar to really much, like the guest. I hope that guest got the enough and a good amount of knowledge from your presentation and demonstration. So I thank you a lot, sir, and thanks again for being a part of our seminar and providing us such a lovely and knowledgeable speech. Thank you, sir. So, as we do have one more speaker from AIMS Delhi. So let me welcome Dr. Achal Kumar Srivastav, sir. So Dr. Achal Kumar Srivastav, sir, is a MBBS, MD in medicine, DM in neurology, FRCP from London, FAAN, FICP, FIAM, FNASC, FAMS, and he's also the professor in the Department of Neurology, AIMS, New Delhi. So Dr. H.L. Kumar Srivastava has done MBBS and MD medicine from MLN Medical College, Allahabad, and DM neurology from the AIIMS New Delhi, where he is currently working as a professor in the Department of Neurology. He's an intimate neurophysician and clinical scientist in the field of movement disorders and neurophysiology, who have profound interest in the research and has a legendary vision in the field of neurogenetics. He has more than 20 research projects as a principal investigator and has published over 200 research articles in a high index journal from a brain to science. He has guided more than hundreds DM, MDMS, and PhD students. He is executive member of several national scientific associations. He has received several awards in international as well as in national conference for his excellent clinical and research work. So I warmly welcome Dr. Achal Kumar sir to our webinar. Achal sir, hand over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Papu. Yeah, at the outset, I would like to thank C-DAC and the ministry who thought of inviting me to deliver a talk in this particular setting, which is more of engineering than actual medical science. Of course, it's an interface, it looks like. And I would also like to thank Dr. Priyanka who coordinated this. So let me go to the presentation. Must be visible now.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay,
It's visible.
thank you. Thank you. So I specifically thought of speaking on stroke, which is a disease of prime concern to us and gives lot of disability and death as well. So there are developments in this particular disease, specifically where we talk of brain-machine interface. So I thought that I'll be discussing on this particular subject. Of course, I do not come from an engineering background, so I will not be able to answer very specific questions related to engineering. However, I will start from stroke now. The outline of my talk will be a little bit about brain-computer interface and then rehabilitation strategy in stroke. And of course, I'll be telling what stroke is. And then use of some interface in stroke rehabilitation. There are several domains where it actually works. And then a little bit about future prospects, because we are very hopeful for this particular disease. We need a lot of help for the patients who have suffered stroke. So when we talk of stroke, it's a disease where we develop deficit, neurodeficit, or part of body stops working. WHO defines this as a rapidly developing sign of focal brain dysfunction because it's a primary disease of brain. Something which lasts beyond 24 hours. So it's technical definition. We need not go into that. However, it's very clear that some part of brain stops functioning and we develop a problem related to that. So as we all know that our brain has got areas, those areas have defined work. Like if you want to move your right upper limb or left upper limb or right lower limb or left lower limb, definite area in the brain starts working and then your limb moves. However, to these areas, these brain tissues, of course, require nutrients and oxygen to work. So for that, we have vascular structure, which supplies to various parts of brain. There is a pattern by which it supplies. There are known arteries which take blood and oxygen to the brain areas. So what happens in stroke? In some of the artery which is going into brain, either a major artery or a smaller artery or a branch of that particular artery, there was a blockage. You can see here in the picture. Either the artery gets blocked or it ruptures. End result is actually same. What happens? This artery, particular artery, where it was taking blood to, the blood and oxygen both will stop. So that particular area will stop working. Or suppose there is a rupture. So again, this artery will stop functioning, and beyond this, blood flow will be stopped. So that means this particular area, suppose here it has ruptured, so this area will not have enough nutrients or oxygen and will be dead in some time. Similarly over here, if there is a blockage. So these two are the most common mechanism of stroke. So it must be of interest that which is more common. So this blockage one is more common, to the tune of almost 80%, and rupture is some 20% only. This is just general, otherwise we do have final figures, but in general it is 80% and 20%. If we talk of stroke in terms of death, it is second leading cause of death. And if we talk of disability, then it is third leading cause of disability. There is substantial morbidity if the patient survives of stroke. If it dies, then it's all right. All unknown phenomena died. But there is a number of patients who will survive after stroke. So they will have motor and some various non-motor types of deficits. So what do we have to prevent all this from happening? The rupture one is mostly because of high blood pressure. That means we must keep our blood pressure in check. However, for the blockage, if it has happened, again, here also the risk factors are diabetes, hypertension, smoking, lipids, and all those things. But we have some strategies by which we can, if this blockage has occurred, we can remove that blockage. We call it embolectomy. We go through wires and reach there and remove this blockage. But this work has to be done in a particular time. There is a time frame. If the time frame, that time has passed, then even if you do that, you can remove that clot even then, but it doesn't work. But that part of brain is already gone. So timely intervention is required. These days, it is up to 4.5 hours. If the patient reaches beyond that, you may not be able to help. That part of brain would be damaged. So as I said, that if the patient survives, there will be a lot of disability. So despite these reperfusion strategies, nearly 1/3 of patients remain severely disabled. There are several disability things which appear when we are looking into patient stroke, fatigue, physical disability. You can see the tune, some 80% people have physical, memory problem, depression, low mood, and then speech and communication issues in almost 60% patients. So these are some figures to tell you why we surely need help in this particular case. This again to tell you what is the statistics. About 20 million people suffer from stroke every year if we talk of world. It causes deaths up to the tune of 5 million. And another 5 million are rendered disabled because of stroke. Only in 1 in 6 person gets a stroke in its lifetime. If you talk of Indian stats, about 1.5 million people suffer from strokes every year. 3,000 to 4,000 Indians suffer from stroke every day. You can understand the ratio. Strokes cause more deaths in the country than combining malaria, tuberculosis, HIV. So what we do once stroke has developed, one is to prevent stroke from happening. So in order to do that, we must know the risk factors which actually produce this. So I told about diabetes, hypertension, smoking, the cardiac disease, the cardiac, some valvular disease, then heavy weight, then stress and all those things. There are several risk factors, including OSA. Several of these are preventable. You can keep your blood pressure in check. You can keep your sugar in check. You can stop smoking. So all these things you have done, but you still develop stroke because this is not 100%. You don't do all this, nothing will happen. It's not like that. Less likely chances of having stroke. That means you still may have stroke. And if you have stroke, then as I said, there are a lot of chances when you may remain disabled. So once you have reached to that state, that you reach the hospital late maybe, and even the removal of embolus could not help you, or in some scenarios, removal of embolus is postponed because you can't do anything. Already brain is damaged. If you have reached hospital at 12 hours, 24 hours, there is nothing which can be done to remove. Even if you remove the embolus, it will not help. So what do we do? Once patient gets stabilized, his respiration, his blood flow, all are maintained, then we take physical measures. This is again starts immediately as soon as the patient is settled, the exercises start. But once you are at home or you have less disability, you are still walking with stick or without stick. It again depends on how much deficit you have developed because of stroke. So we ask them to do exercises, physiotherapy measures. There are some specialized training measures like bimanual arm training. And then the other one is constant induced movement therapy. They help a lot. But again, not to all patients, number one. And number two, they are still disabled. And this disability leads them to a lot of depression. We call this bottom-up intervention. Here we do distal limb modulation to improve neural circuits involved the motor recovery. So this is why it is the bottom intervention. As I said, all people are not helped by this measure. This is showing constant induced movement therapy in stroke. You can see here, partially affected. Again, I will say if it is totally affected, not working at all, then you can't help these people. If there is some power left, then these people are subjected to constant induced movement therapy. And this helps a lot. You can see here, putting ball in the jar, putting butter on bread, pouring water here, and putting peg in the holes. So these are very helpful techniques. Even with intense task-specific training and physical activity and exercises and all that, 15 to 30% of patients will have poor recovery. Poor recovery means they do need help. Can we help them? 20 to 25% of stroke patients are not candidates for those specific exercises which I told in the previous slide. As I said that if they have a lot of deficit, then it's not possible to help them. So this type of approach, which I said bottom-up approach, is ineffective in patients with very poor upper extremity function. So we do need something. So nowadays we talk of neural plasticity, brain plasticity. And here comes the top-up approach. What happens here? To restore motor functions, we do facilitate neural circuit reorganization. So what we do? I'll be discussing later a few of the slides. Artificial intelligence is of great help over here. How does it help? There are several ways. There are several modalities which have come up recently: brain-computer interface, virtual reality, augmented reality. These are some of those measures which help a lot. The basic idea is to reinforce connections across that infarcted or damaged part of brain tissue. And if you keep on doing this kind of exercises or support through even artificial intelligence or brain-computer interface or whatever, there are new connections which develop, and that leads to prolonged recovery. So coming to brain-computer interface and how does it help us? It's a communication device that does not depend on the usual output pathway. The pathway is, once you think that you are going to move right upper limb, you are going to take your right upper limb upwards. That means first you thought, then it goes to the important area, motor area of the brain. And then it sends signals through spinal cord, through peripheral nerves, to the muscles which are moving the right upper limb or left upper limb, whichever you thought of. So, however, this technology takes signals by methods from your brain and takes directly, bypasses the peripheral nerves and muscles, takes directly to the muscles or performs the work, whatever you are thinking of, by several other measures we'll be discussing later. This interface enables interactions with one's environment through brain signals. That is what it does. How does it do? It takes physiological measurements of signals directly from the brain and converts them into signals that are used to control external devices. This concept of a brain-computer interface was first accepted, I will say, or first discussed in 1999 in first international conference on BCI technology. So this is a picture depicting how does it actually work. This is brain, you can see here, you know, currents flow from here to here or here to here, in several directions. This is just a section showing this is scalp area, and these are brain areas. In between there is bone. So there are three kinds of ways by which you can collect brain signals. One is from the scalp, that is electroencephalography. Then you can put electrodes, then it will be invasive. Put electrodes on the surface of the brain. Electrocardiography. Then there are ways to take some raw signals from depth of the brain. Again, it will be invasive technology. This is digitized, signal processing is done, and then it is sent to various devices, to computers. Can go to movement control, can go to the locomotion, where you are sitting on a wheelchair. You can manage all these things just by thinking over here. These are neurorehabilitation techniques. Again, it's just because interface is working. Your arm can't work, your leg can't work, but interface is working by which you are being assisted. So there are four steps: signal acquisition, feature extraction, feature transformation, and then device output. You can see it depicted in the picture again. Signal acquisition being done here, feature extraction is done, and then it goes to the external output devices, and then the task is performed through either virtual reality, functional electrical stimulation of those areas which you thought of that you are going to move right up a limb. Then there are exoskeletons which are able to move your own limb. Then intelligent wheelchair, where you are thinking and then wheelchair is moving and going here and there, moving inside rooms as well. Again, these are pivotal signals which the brain-computer interface captures. Electroencephalogram from the surface, electrocardiogram from the surface of the brain, this from the scalp, outside the bone calvarium. Then intracortical recordings. So this is openly, you can see here. This is surgery done, and then the electrodes have been, electrocardiogram can be recorded. This is how it looks like on the computer. So there are not only electrical ways, there are some of the ways like metabolic ways as well. You look for oxygen signals, you look for glucose signals. We call it functional MRI or near infrared spectroscopy. Here you take up signals, electrical signals, magnetoencephalography, magnetic signals, electrocardiography, electrical signals, electrocortical point signal acquisition, again electrical signals. These two have metabolic signals. So again, out of all this, what we need is safety for the patient, whether it is invasive or non-invasive, and then we should have a very good signal. So both it looks like are not feasible. You want a non-invasive recording and very good signal. It doesn't look like feasible currently. However, we are trying to reach to the maximum possible scenario where very good signals are received. So these two technologies are very invasive because you have to remove the scalp and then put the electrode on the surface of the brain or somewhere in the depth of the brain. But they provide very good signal quality and sensitivity over a period of time diminishes in this particular. However, this usually required electrocardiography. We do it when we are doing, the patients are undergoing epilepsy surgery. Electrocardiography frequently done. So, as I said, that neuroplasticity is the most important thing by which we are able to help these patients. It is a process by which brain learns new behaviors, adapts to their environment, and modifies your behavior. What happens inside is that there are developments of new synapses. The older neurons to some extent work. So that is how there is plasticity, but again, something has to be done from outside. There is Hebbian theory, which says that stimulation of postsynaptic neurons by presynaptic neurons, repetitive stimulation. Here we talk of repetitive stimulation. It enhances the efficacy of synaptic transmission. Thereby, again, things will improve. Motor intent is captured and translated to action by the machine. This is what the interface does, where you are thinking and things are being done. There are two types of brain plasticity, type 1, type 2. Structural plasticity, where experiences, memories change the brain's physical structure. And type 2, functional plasticity, means brain functions move from damaged area. As I said, then in stroke, what will happen? Part of brain will be damaged. So undamaged areas or partially damaged areas start working. They take up the function of the part of brain which got damaged. So that is what we say, brain functions move from damaged area to the undamaged area. So this is what we are looking for. We want that these things should come up and the patient should improve gradually. Then there are environmental signals, which again work on brain plasticity. This is a picture depicting how the brain signal goes to acquisition, processing, feature examination, all those things. And then there are several ways by which one can work on haptic knob robot, MeitY Manus robot, hand exoskeleton, hand and arm orthosis, and then virtual hand, visual feedback, and functional electrical stimulation, all those things. These signals reach there, start working, and then you again get feedback. So in stroke rehabilitation, we have to work on various things. Like, as I said, various domains need action: motor rehabilitation, sensory rehabilitation, communication rehabilitation, then cognitive rehabilitation, and then environmental interaction. All these things are required to be acted upon. And all these things are actually acted upon when you are using BCI in stroke rehabilitation. To some are the to little extent or much extent, depending on the progress which has been made till now. If we talk of rehabilitation again in the motor recovery, then there are direct input methods where external stimuli goes to the brain, like using transcranial magnetic stimulation, transcranial direct current stimulation, and like peripheral limb training or robot-assisted therapy or virtual reality. These by using non-invasive brain stimulation. Here you are working from periphery. That was directly acting on the brain. Then there is a system of motor imagery where you think of doing something and that particular area in the brain starts working. Although the end result is not happening because that particular area is not connected to the final out common pathway, or I should say the part of the body which has to work. Several experiments have been done. This is a 3-arm study where the patients were randomly allocated to BCI and haptic knob alone, or standard arm therapy. So it was found that there was significantly larger motor gains in the brain-computer interface and haptic knob group compared to the standard arm therapy group. So that means it actually is working. So here also you can see by pursuing the damaged hand outwards, this is minus report, the BCI device successfully detects MI imagery from real-time EEG signals based on the protocol. Here also it was found that after 12 recovery sessions over 4 weeks span, there were major changes. You can see here, various authors have worked on BCI facility, BCI robotic, BCI FES. Some of them have worked on upper limb, hand, arm, and finger. So these are body parts which are actually affected in stroke. And as you know, how important they are. So all of them have showed some improvement. And many of them have showed very significant improvement. Coming to sensory rehabilitation, this is very important. Haptics are very essential for many aspects of motor function. Like you are doing some dexterity related work, climbing stairs, lighting a match. So you do need tactile input. Studies on non-human primates have shown that it does work. Coming to communication rehabilitation. So these are speech production problems, comprehension, and communication deficits. As I said, and shown in the first few slides that there are 30% patients with stroke who have speech-related problem, comprehension-related problem, communication-related problem. So brain-computer interface over here can not only provide a tool for communication, but can also support neuronal plasticity by activating language circuits or language areas in the brain. Again, for this purpose, you need signals from the brain. So there are 3 signals which may be used: slow cortical potential, sensory motor rhythms, and P300 evoked potential. These are some of the cognitive potentials which are used for the purpose. So P300, again, a cognitive potential. It was used with BCI in 5 participants who were found to have post-stroke aphasia, means they were not able to speak. So it was again found that this particular regime does help these patients. And they noticed that they were able to communicate using a speller with an accuracy of almost 100%. Cognitive rehabilitation, there are several cognitive domains which are affected. There are a range of deficits, including poor concentration, slowed information processing, memory impairment, reduced semantic fluency, difficulty producing or processing speech, and aphasia. For us, this speech is also part of cognition. So cognition or cognitive rehabilitation is defined as systematic, functionally oriented service of therapeutic activities. Very important if we talk of stroke. So again, you all know the previous speaker also talking about cognition. So there are various domains which we do test. It requires about an hour to test the cognition in each patient. A recent meta-analysis showed encouraging evidence from several studies demonstrating the effectiveness of neurofeedback-based cognitive therapy. Again, as I said, things are, of course, helping. I will say we are on the way. Environmental interaction can be used in many different fields. Like, as I said, patient moving around wheelchair or using prosthesis. Then people may use these interfaces to communicate, to write text even. Then for general public, applications to control toys, video games, or general computer applications. These are again, signals have to be collected from brain, analyzed, processed, and then several other systems will be connected with that and they will work. One author conducted a study using BCI for the control of smart homes and found that healthy subjects achieved a 77% accuracy on the task given. However, better accuracy are obtained by subjects with disabilities. You can see here, probably they were more interested in improvement, more interested in working. Those were disabled individuals. They were more motivated. That's why there was better improvement in those patients. This is a smart home where you can see here, from here you enter and there are several things which are placed. These are tasks which will happen over there. The principle is that you just imagine the concept of a lamp, like then visualize a lamp in their mind, and then BCI recognizes the concept and triggers a command that turns on the light. Similarly for other things as well. This was an experiment done. We developed a brain-driven intelligent wheelchair system that was tested in 3 patients and 4 healthy subjects. The task required user to drive the system close to a walking person and talk to them, to pass through a door into another room, and to pick up a bottle of water on a table and drink it. And the results showed that the system operates with flexibility and efficiency, with users only needing to issue small commands to receive attentive services. Here it looks very interesting. But once you see a patient of stroke, you will find that many of them may not be helped even by these mechanisms. This I'm talking about functional electrical stimulation. As I said, that you're also doing electrical stimulation of those paralyzed muscle, those paralyzed limb muscles. What happens in that? There is a psychological advantage. It improves your self-esteem that your muscle is working. Then there was another experiment, brain actuated functional electrical stimulation elicits lasting arm motor recovery after stroke. Then BCI virtual reality. This can improve individual motivation by increasing the appeal of training, thus shortening the training cycle, providing more effective feedback, and facilitating recovery of brain function. Then effects of brain-computer interface with virtual reality. This was a pilot study in stroke patients. Again, this also showed positive results. Then virtual reality for stroke rehabilitation. This appeared in 2015. The Cochrane review was done. And it said that there was insufficient evidence to reach conclusions about the effect of virtual reality and interactive video gaming on grip, strength, gait speed, or global motor functioning. However, by this time, less experiments have been done, and also the things have advanced. This was published in 2015. Of course, it has not been reviewed since then. Once it is reviewed, we will come to know what more experiments have been done. This is a BCI exoskeleton robots. You can see here in the picture. Process signal from the brain goes to these exoskeletons, then they work. Again, this method provides a lot of help to those patients with stroke. Control regional brain-computer interface, control of a powered exoskeleton for motor recovery in chronic stroke surveillance. In this, the result was again 6.2 times points, I will say, improvement in the action research arm test. This is a test which is performed for showing the functionality in the arm. Again, this also showed that there was improvement at 12 weeks. So all these experiments have shown some or the other kind of benefit. But of course, I think that still a lot of time is left when it comes actually to the people. While great progress has been made in the BCI motor control, disadvantage for the recovery of tactile or cutaneous sensation is still there. This is where a combination of bidirectional BCI and a closed loop system that integrates both motor output and sensory input is appealing, and it looks very interesting. Synchronous versus asynchronous BCI. This is again something which will be dealt with in coming times, and of course it will produce a very interesting results and will be of great help to the patients. With this, I would like to conclude that BCI-based stroke rehabilitation experiments have given exciting results. And of course, when I tried to review all this, I also got excited because we have personally seen those patients which have suffered from stroke and which many of them are not in a state even to move. They are lying in the bed only. And of course, just imagine if something of motor imagery comes into picture, those people will also feel happy. Of course, they will not be able to move, but still they can feel happy. Future experiments in this important area of research are required, and of course, they will be done. Many are being done. Many scientists are actually involved. Some of them I know. Thank you so
much. Thank you very much, sir, for your presentation and knowledgeable presentation, I would say. And thanks for such information that I hope we're going to help for many researchers and many scholars, those who are working toward BCI. And thanks for presenting this presentation in our webinar, sir. I would request to the guests, if they are having any questions, you can ask now.
Meanwhile, others are typing their questions. Sir, I have one question. It's very primitive. I needed to understand when we know about that golden period time of the stroke person.
Yes,
so
yes.
that we need to get take care of the person who is getting stroke that time. So, would there be any possibility for understanding the behavioral or any other aspect by which we can understand, pre-assume the things are going to be not normal in coming 24 hours or 26 hours? Can we understand the stroke possibility beforehand?
So I wish that this may happen sometime. And this doesn't exist. These phenomena happen suddenly. These are sudden onset illnesses. As I have shown in the picture, that there is a burst, that the artery ruptures. This happens suddenly. You don't know which artery is going to rupture. And also there is a blockage, which again happens suddenly. So there are risk factors. I will say that not one day before, but several years before, if you have got hypertension, if you have got diabetes, if you have got coronary artery disease, if you have been smoking, if you are indulged in alcoholism, and also if you are obese, if you have obstructive sleep apnea, you have sedentary lifestyle. So these are some well-known risk factors. But it is not like if you have hypertension, you will surely have a stroke. It's not like that. So, many years before, once you have developed hypertension, that you are at risk of developing stroke, but not 24 hours or 42 hours, 78 hours before. That could have been a great help.
Being very optimistic, sir, I had asked this question. Hope we would be doing it for later, 10, 20 years later, we would be able to do it this time.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. So right now, sir, we don't have any question in the chat box, and as being the time constraint, we do have one more session. So I again thank you a lot for presenting your presentation in our seminar. Thank you. Thanks much. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, so guys, we do have one more speaker. So let me introduce you, Dr. Maria D'Souza, Joint Director and Head DRNIS at Institute of Nuclear Medicine and Applied Science Laboratory at DRDO. So we do welcome Dr. Maria D'Souza. Ma'am, are you there? Okay, so let me give you the brief introduction about the ma'am first, and then after that, ma'am can start the presentation. So Dr. Maria D'Souza ma'am is active in clinical work, research, and teaching as a joint director and scientist F at Institute of Nuclear Medicine and Applied Science Laboratory at DRDO. She is actively involved in a non-invasive multimodality image pertaining to MRI, CT, PET, and ultrasound. She is a keen scientist with over 75 publications to her credit, beside being reviewer of several journals. She has successfully bribed the twin specialist of radiologists and nuclear medicines with her expertise in PET CT imaging. She was and is a principal investigator and a co-investigator for several national as well as international research projects, which is related to onco imaging, neuroimaging, and imaging in tuberculosis. She has the she has the rare distinctions of having topped the University of Delhi as at MBBS level. So again, I warmly welcome you, ma'am, for presenting your presentation at our seminar, and hand over to you, ma'am. Thank you.
I'd like to thank you for that lovely introduction, and I wish to thank the organizers, especially Dr. Priyanka Jain, for inviting me to this forum. So as you mentioned, I'll be talking about neuroimaging in traumatic brain injury. Basically, I'm a radiologist, not a computer person. So I'll be talking from a clinician's perspective. So we all know that medical imaging has become a cornerstone in medical diagnosis today. We have a huge armamentarium of imaging modalities, and we can broadly classify them into two kinds. One is what tells us about the structures in the body, and the other is those modalities which tell us about the function. So when we talk about the structural or morphological imaging, we mainly talk about CT, computed tomography, MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, ultrasound, and of course, the plain humble X-ray. And when we talk about functional or molecular imaging, we generally refer to PET, that is positron emission tomography, SPECT, that is single photon emission computed tomography, optical imaging, and MRI again. Now, if we had a modality which tells us only about the structure without the function, it is like looking at a corpse. And on the other hand, if you know only about the function without knowing anything about the structure, it is looking like a ghost. So we need to have an imaging modality which tells us both about structure and function. And we are blessed with MRI, which tells us about both things. But at the same time, since the other modalities concentrate mainly on structure or function, we now have this concept called hybrid or hyphenated imaging. That is to say, you combine two different modalities and they have a synergistic effect on diagnosis. Like you combine PET and CT and you get PET CT, SPECT and CT and you get SPECT CT, or PET and MR and you get PET MR. So for instance, here you have, I'm just giving you a simple example. Like this is a patient who is known to have a brain tumor. Now, this part of the brain looks absolutely normal, whereas this part is abnormal. Now, wherein lies the tumor and what is the reactionary tissue which is surrounding it? It's very difficult to say just looking at the plain MR image. Now, on the other hand, when you do a PET scan for this patient, you find that there is this area of increased activity, which clearly shows us that this is where the viable tumor tissue resides. But we don't know which part of the brain it actually belongs to, what are the adjacent structures, etc. Now, when we fuse the PET image with the MR image, you get this PET MR image, which beautifully delineates the tumor, as well as it also tells us about which are the parts of the brain which are involved and which are the parts which are spared. I just thought I would like to introduce this concept of traumatic brain injury to you. So when we talk of traumatic brain injury, it is any kind of insult to the brain which occurs due to physical injury. And in that, we can classify it in various ways. But one of the simple classifications is based on the etiology, the cause. And that is into blunt, blast, and ballistic injury. So when we talk of blunt traumatic brain injury or blunt TBI, it refers to the person hitting against a blunt object or a blunt object hitting against the person, like a brick falling down on hitting the head of the person. The other is the blast injury, which typically occurs when there is a blast explosion, which can happen due to a terrorist attack or in a war scenario, and it's the shock wave which causes extensive damage to the brain. And then we have the ballistic injury, which is due to penetrating injuries, which could be a gunshot wound, or it could be the shrapnel, which is raised from a blast explosion. So the mechanism of injury in all the three kinds of injuries is different, and therefore the manifestations would also be different. Coming to another classification, that is a clinical classification into which we divide the TBI into mild, moderate, and severe varieties. Now, we have different criteria based on which we classify them into these three kinds, which includes things like the duration of loss of consciousness, the period of amnesia, that is loss of memory, and most importantly, what we call as the Glasgow Coma Scale, the GCS, which is based on eye-opening, verbal responses, and motor responses. So a normal patient would secure a score of 15 because his eye-opening would be spontaneous, his verbal response would be oriented, and motor responses, when you ask him to move a part of his body, he does that. But in TBI, many times these three responses are severely compromised, and then you have a way of classifying it into mild, if the subject gets a score of between 13 to 15, moderate if it's between 9 to 12, and severe if the score is just between 3 to 8. Now, when we come to imaging in traumatic brain injury, so the most widely used technique across the world is to do the CT scan. Now, why do we prefer CT as an acute emergency tool in TBI? That's because a CT scan is a very rapid technique. You can actually make the patient get into the CT gantry. It just takes a few seconds to up to 1 minute in our latest scanners to acquire the CT scan, and it gives you exquisite detail. Like in this case, you can see the fracture of his skull, which is very nicely seen on the 3D volume rendered image as well. And underneath this fractured skull, you can see these bright deposits, which are hematomas, blood collections. MRI is reserved to cases wherein there are persistent or unexplained neurological deficits. What CT cannot show, MR is able to show much better, like these hemorrhages, which are appearing as these black spots. But MRI is much more time consuming. It is also expensive. And so CT remains the mainstay of diagnosis in most cases. So as I mentioned, CT and MR are really the cornerstones in the evaluation of acute TBI. But we have a challenge here, and that is that there is a subset of patients who appear to be neurologically intact at the time that they sustain the TBI. Their standard imaging tests, whether it be CT or MR, generally look normal, but they have sustained a potentially significant intracranial injury. And that applies most often to patients with mild TBI, wherein the CT and MR, the conventional MRI, generally look normal. Now, then it becomes a difficult challenge because these patients are they're discharged from the hospital and then they go on to develop long-term symptoms. Now, although mild TBI is at the mildest end of the TBI spectrum, and generally The patients recover in a question of a few days to a few months. Yet there is a subset of patients who develop long-term cognitive deficits and neurological problems. So because of the sheer numbers, that is, if you look at mild TBI as compared to the other forms of TBI, you would realize that about 80% of TBI is contributed by mild TBI. So the challenge here is to identify those patients who are at risk of having prolonged post-concussive symptoms and neurological deficits, although they may not appear to be very seriously injured at the time of the incident. So that is where we need to go for advanced neuroimaging, and that includes a functional MRI, including resting state fMRI and task-based fMRI, diffusion tensor imaging, brain morphometry, brain perfusion studies, MR spectroscopy, imaging of glucose metabolism on PET scans, neurotransmitter imaging, and amyloid imaging. Now, before I tell you why we need these advanced tools, a little more of the mechanism underlying the injury. So I'm referring here mostly to the blunt TBI because that's the most common. So when there is an impact of some blunt object against the skull is put into motion, and that goes and hits against the brain, leading to this kind of injury, which we saw in our previous slide, which is called the coup injury. Then the brain is set into motion, and then it goes and hits against the other aspect of the skull, which is called the contre-coup injury. So what happens is that classically in a blunt TBI, you have coup injuries and contre-coup injuries. And a lot of attention down the decades has been going to these two injuries. But what we realize now is that this intervening brain parenchyma, which was largely ignored for a long time, has also sustained damage. And many times that damage is invisible to the standard imaging modalities, and it needs some advanced techniques to unearth it. So what exactly is that damage? So this is what is called as diffuse axonal injury. The brain is made up of billions of neurons. And when there is any injury to the brain, it's these neurons which get affected. There might be just a shearing of the axons, or there might be some actual transection of the axon if the injury is severe enough. And these are the basic building blocks or the units which help us in functioning. It helps the brain in functioning the way it does. So any kind of damage to the axon would obviously produce far-reaching neurological, cognitive, and other deficits. For instance, if you look at this patient's brain, this is a cut section of a part of the brain of a patient who had a very severe road traffic injury. And he had multiple fractures and damage to many organs, and he finally died. But his brain did not appear to be very severely involved. But when they did the autopsy, then they found this part of the brain, which is called the corpus callosum, which has these black dots, which are microhemorrhages, showing that he too had sustained a classical diffuse axonal injury. So what are the tools which help us to identify these changes? For the most part, it is MRI, which is showing the most extensive changes. So I will, for the large part of my talk, be concentrating on MR. And one of the simple techniques which we used on MRI is called as susceptibility weighted imaging. Now, this refers to the magnetic inhomogeneities. The basic principle which underlies an MRI is that you make use of magnetic energy. Now, when you have paramagnetic substances within the body or within the field of view, there will be a signal loss. So that area appears dark. And if you look at our blood, blood contains hemoglobin, and hemoglobin contains iron. The iron pigment is paramagnetic. So any accumulation of blood would lead to magnetic inhomogeneities, and that leads to what is called as susceptibility effects, and that shows up nicely on MRI. So if you look at the conventional classical MRI, like this is a T2 weighted scan, it looks absolutely normal. But when you look at the SWI, the susceptibility weighted image, you see the coup and the contra-coup injuries in the form of multiple microhemorrhages, which suggests a diffuse axonal involvement. The next technique which we have is diffusion tensor imaging. Now, diffusion imaging is, in fact, it is based simply on the classical Brownian motion, which was first described by Einstein in 1905. So in this, if you remember about the Brownian motion, any particle will tend to move randomly in space or within a certain fluid medium. And that's what happens to the protons within our body. Our body, for the most part of it, contains water, and it's full of water molecules and therefore protons. And if you were to trace the path of a proton, it would have a very random configuration. But if you look at the protons which are present in the axons, in the neurons of our brain, our neurons are like long cylinders. And if you put water molecules into these long cylinders, you would find that the majority of the diffusion is directed along the long axis of the cylinder, and it's restricted in the other directions. So this kind of diffusion, which is almost equal in all possible directions, is called isotropic. And this kind of diffusion, which is highly directional, is called anisotropic diffusion. And in our neurons, we have a lot of linear structures, like the cell membrane is the most important, which sort of dictates this diffusion to be along the long axis of the neurons. And if you look at the intracellular organelles, the microtubules and neurofilaments, they are also directed linearly. And outside, we have the myelin sheath. So all of this ensures that the diffusion of water molecules within the axons is highly directional, and therefore you have a high anisotropy. So in DTI, we have various quantitative data metrics like fractional anisotropy, mean diffusivity, axial and radial diffusivity, etc., which tells us about the direction of diffusion. And therefore, that is a surrogate marker for axonal integrity. So when we look at the whole thing being translated into an MR image, the diffusion image is what we see out here. These are the ventricles, which contain nothing but the cerebrospinal fluid. And the diffusion is pretty high in these areas because they are not constrained by myelin sheath or cell membrane. And you see it bright out here on this particular map, which is called the ADC map. Whereas if you look at the fractional anisotropy map, here you find that areas which are highly anisotropic in diffusion would be appearing bright, like this corticospinal tract and the corpus callosum, and other areas which have a low anisotropy, like the ventricles, they appear dark. And we have something called as a color-coded fractional anisotropy map, which will not only tell us about the directionality of the diffusion, but also give us an idea of the orientation of the diffusion and thereby the orientation of the white matter tracts. So by convention, all over the world, if the direction of diffusion is from right to left, it appears red. If it is from superior to inferior, it appears blue. And if it is from anterior to posterior, that's front to back or back to front, it is green. So you can make out the tracts very beautifully here. The corpus callosum, which appears red, the corticospinal tracts, which are appearing blue, and so on. And now, we had a patient who was a 22-year-old male with a road traffic accident 3 days prior to the scan. The patient was not doing well, although his CT scan appeared to be normal. His MRI appeared to be normal. His susceptibility weighted image also appeared to be normal. But when we did the DTI, we found that there were deficits in the corpus callosum. We have here a normal control for comparison. So you can see the deficits here as well as further posteriorly. So this is what was responsible for his neurological deficits. So we have done a study of over 100 patients of TBI using DTI, and we found altered data matrix in multiple white matter tracts, such as the cingulum, the inferior longitudinal fasciculus, the anterior thalamic radiation, and we found multiple parameters to be disrupted, which includes fractional anisotropy, which tells us about the directionality of diffusion, mean diffusivity, which tells us about the overall diffusion, axial diffusivity, which is the diffusion along the long axis of the white matter tract, and radial diffusivity, which tells us about the diffusion perpendicular to the main white matter tracts. And we found that this was more pronounced in patients with a high RPSQ score. So RPSQ is called the Rivermead Post-Concussion Symptom Questionnaire, which tells us about the severity of post-concussion symptoms. So an injury to the brain produces a concussion. And subsequent to that, the patients would be having multiple symptoms, which could be organic in origin, such as headache, or it could be affective, such as mood disturbance, depression, irritability, etc. Or it could be cognitive, like a loss of memory, taking longer time to think, etc. So all this is bundled together into one questionnaire, which is used across the world. It's a 16-point questionnaire with 64 points as the maximum, and it tells you how severe the post-concussion symptoms are. We also assessed the cognitive profile of these patients using the PGI battery of brain dysfunction, which is an Indianized version of cognitive tests, which can be administered in Hindi, which is the local language in Delhi. And so we found a good correlation with the working memory score. So now when we talk of DTI, there are a variety of methods of performing this particular analysis, which includes the region of interest method, the voxel-based assessment, diffusion tensor tractography, which tells you about the entire white matter tract. And that is what we are using at our institution. And then we have tract-based spatial statistics, and we have high-resolution DTI, such as cue ball imaging, Hardy or high angular resolution diffusion imaging, and diffusion spectrum imaging. But having said that, DTI does have certain limitations. That is mainly sensitivity to motion, sensitivity to eddy currents, to image noise, averaging of multiple fiber populations with different orientations in one voxel. So we have this problem at places where the fibers are crisscrossing. We are able to get the main white matter tract in a voxel, and the entire fractional anisotropy and mean diffusivity is ascribed to that tract. But if a voxel contains multiple tracts, as it sometimes happens, then it can go haywire. So for that, we have these high resolution techniques, but they are extremely time consuming, and it's difficult to get the patients to cooperate long enough to perform these scans. Although, of course, there are improvements in hardware and software which are making this happen. And heterogeneity in data analysis is another big issue. Then we have something called as magnetic resonance spectroscopy, which is a molecular-based MR technique which tells us about the intracellular metabolic status. So you can get a peep of what are the major metabolic changes in the brain. And we have these common neuronal markers which we assess on MR spectroscopy, which includes N-acetyl aspartate, which decreases with neuronal loss or dysfunction, creatine, which is a marker for intact brain energy metabolism, choline, which is a marker for membrane disruption, lactate, which is generated as a result of anaerobic glycolysis, glutamate, which is the most important excitatory neurotransmitter of the brain, and myoinositol, which is a marker of glial proliferation. So wherever there's an injury, the glial cells start to proliferate. So this is what a normal MR spectrum looks like, and the highest peak we have is that of NAA, that is N-acetyl aspartate, followed by creatine. And a lot of studies have been performed in TBI, both mild, moderate, and severe varieties. And we found different changes in different parts of the brain. And this gives us a valuable information about the degree of neuronal injury. And we have also observed that the changes are not just limited to the identified abnormality in the brain, but are also seen remote to what is actually identified, again suggesting that this could be due to the diffuse axonal injury. And these changes show a good correlation with the neuropsychological profile of the patient. So here we have a control, a normal healthy control, and here we have a TBI patient, and you can see the good NAA peak in the normal person, followed by creatine and then choline, whereas in the case of TBI, we find a drop in the NAA level, which shows that there is a neuronal damage, and a fall in the creatine levels, a rise in the choline levels, which in this case is because of membranal injury, leading to an increased membranous turnover, and an increase in the myoinositol peak, again suggesting that there is gliosis or an attempt to repair the damage. Despite all that, MRS has its own limitations. It requires sophisticated data acquisition and quantification methods. There is lack of standardization and quality assurance of MR spectroscopy data acquisition and analysis. There is limited spatial and temporal resolution, and many metabolites of potential interest cannot be detected with the current techniques. And then we have certain brain areas which are not suitable for MRS studies because they are too small, like in small brainstem nuclei, or they are close to the bone or to the CSF, to the cerebrospinal fluid, etc. Then we have something called morphometric assessment. So you have voxel-based techniques, that is called voxel-based morphometry, wherein the entire morphometry of the brain, it could be the total intracranial volume, the gray matter volume, the white matter volume, the ventricular volume, etc., which can be distinguished. And you have surface-based techniques, which tells you about the cortex. So this gray structure, which is enveloping the brain, is the cortex, and this white or the gray matter, and this white structure is the medulla or the white matter. And on this particular image, the cerebrospinal fluid in the ventricles appears black. So in the surface-based techniques, you can get the cortical thickness, the cortical surface area, the cortical volume. You could get that for the entire brain. You could get it for a part of the brain which you're interested in, maybe the frontal lobe or the hippocampus, depending on what is your question. So in this particular study, they did a study between severe TBI versus controls, and they found that there were deficits or there was a decrease in the volume in important parts of the brain, such as the corpus callosum, the basal ganglia, the thalamus, etc. We then move on to fMRI or functional MRI. So as the name suggests, it tells you something about the brain function. Now, in the classical fMRI, we make use of what is called as bold imaging, that is blood oxygen level dependent imaging. Now, the basic principle for that is that when any subject performs a task, there is an increase in the neuronal activity, and that leads to increase in the blood flow. And with the increase in the blood flow to that part of the brain, there is an increase in the level of oxyhemoglobin because the supply outstrips the demand, and therefore the oxy to deoxyhemoglobin ratio is increased. Now, oxyhemoglobin is diamagnetic, while deoxyhemoglobin is paramagnetic. So overall, the effect is a very slight increase in the image intensity. So any part of the brain wherein a neuronal activity is going on, there will be a slight brightness there because of the increased blood flow, which is secondary to the increased neuronal activity. So that's the principle underlying a task-based fMRI. And there are various kinds of tasks which are made to be performed by the patient depending on the question. You can ask them to perform a motor task, or maybe a sensory task, or a visual stimulation, or an auditory stimulation, or in this case, for instance, which is very popular at our institute, a working memory paradigm. So here we make the patient do different kinds of tasks which would test his working memory. So it is called the N-back task. So in the 0-back task, you just ask him to press a particular button every time he sees a particular letter. Like for instance, every time he sees the letter C, he presses the button. In the 1-back task, he has to press a button if he sees the particular letter which is getting repeated. It could be any kind of letter, like here you have 2 times X, or you have G being repeated twice, and that is 1-back. And if it is 2-back, like you have S being repeated 2 times back, or you have M being repeated, it becomes 2-back. And similarly 3-back, wherein you have a letter being repeated 3 times behind. So you can see that the task is increasing in complexity as the patient lies within the MR scanner, and accordingly, you have these working memory circuits in the brain which light up. And with the increase in task complexity, the areas of the brain, that is the bifrontal and parietal lobes, will show increased activity. Now, in our TBI patients, what we find is that when the patient is made to perform from 1 to 2 to 3-back task, if you compare between a 2 and a 1-back task, you find the increase in neuronal activity as compared to the 1-back task when you perform the 2-back task. Now, that is quite understandable. But when you compare this increase in activity as compared to the controls, you find that the healthy controls show a lower level of activation as compared to patients. That indicates that there is a recruitment of additional neuronal resources which is needed for a patient of TBI to be able to perform that task. When, on the other hand, you make the patient perform a 3-back task, we expect the activity to increase even more. But surprisingly, suddenly there is a drop in activity. And that's much lower than that in the healthy controls, indicating that the patient is now outstripped of his neuronal resources and just fails to perform. That was task-based fMRI. Now, when we are talking about resting fMRI, this is also a form of functional MRI, but here you make the patient simply lie down in the scanner. He is made to rest completely, does not have to perform any task. Now, there are areas in the brain which are functionally related, but they are spatially distinct. So to say that they will be present in different parts of the brain, but they tend to fire simultaneously. And they fire, interestingly, even when the patient is at rest. And they form these resting state networks. So we try to exploit the functioning of these resting state networks on resting fMRI. And we have been using this to identify various different resting state networks. And this is an advantage over the task-based fMRI. That is, you don't really need the patient to cooperate while doing this particular test. Even it can be done in very old patients, in children, or in those who cannot really respond. And the site-to-site variability in this particular form of fMRI is much less as compared to a task-based fMRI. So here we did a series of about 80 mild TBI patients. We did the resting fMRI, and when we compared them with healthy controls, we found that there were deficits in key networks of the brain, which included the somatomotor network, the central executive network, the anterior default mode network, and the auditory network. Now, having said that, fMRI too has limitations. The first is that bold response, which we use in fMRI, is a hemodynamic response. It's not a direct measure of neural response. The second thing is that this hemodynamic response is set into action about 3 to 5 seconds after you give the task. So there is a sluggishness of the response, whereas you have modalities like EEG and MEG, which are much faster. Of course, the resolution in those cases is much less than that on MRI. And if there is a decrease in the brain perfusion, then there can even be an uncoupling between the CBF, the cerebral blood flow, and the neural activity. We then move on to SPECT and PET. Now, these are nuclear medicine techniques wherein you inject a tracer into the patient's body, a radioactive tracer. In the case of SPECT imaging, we inject tracers which release gamma rays, like you have technetium-99. In the case of PET imaging, you inject tracers which release positrons, for instance, fluorine-18. So SPECT imaging, which we use in the case of TBI, again, it has many applications, but in TBI, we generally use it to assess the cerebral blood flow. And the common tracers we use are technetium-99 labeled hexamethylene propylenamine oxime or ethylene cysteine dimer. And we find focal hypoperfusion, a decrease in perfusion at and near the site of injury, and asymmetrical hypoperfusion in other parts of the brain. The only problem is that it is not very specific, especially if the patient has comorbidities like alcoholism, depression, etc., which also produce changes inherently within the brain. Of course, this has a very high negative predictive value. So here we have a classical example wherein the CT scan shows us hematomas, an intraparenchymal hematoma in the brain and an extradural hematoma as well. And you can see the decreased perfusion on the SPECT scan. Now, the limitations of SPECT are, of course, it involves ionizing radiation. The spatial resolution is in no way comparable to MRI, and it's even less than that of PET. And generally, the studies are done as a comparison with the contralateral brain. The blood flow is not really equivalent to brain metabolism, and it is sensitive but not specific. Moving on to PET imaging. So the most commonly used radiopharmaceutical in the brain in PET is fluorodeoxyglucose, and it's called the workhorse of PET imaging. So the majority of studies on TBI shows either a global or a regional hypometabolism, like in this case as well, and you see the frontal or anterior temporal hypometabolism. And this has correlated well with neuropsychological deficits such as attention, increased irritability, social withdrawal, sleep and memory problems, depression, etc. Of course, PET scan cannot be called as a diagnostic tool. It is a corroborative tool. So here we have a patient who had sustained a traumatic brain injury. This is the normal control. And if you compare the PET scan of the patient, you find these dark blue areas, which are suggestive of hypometabolism using the FDG PET scan as compared to the normal control. Over and above fluorodeoxyglucose, which tells us about the brain metabolism, another very important study which we do in TBI as well is on amyloid deposition. So there is a clear epidemiological association between TBI and the onset of dementia later in life. And one of the hallmarks pathologically is this deposition of amyloid. So we have special tracers which go and bind to this amyloid in the brain. And there's one study which has been published, which shows us, this image shows us the control data with no TBI. And then you can see sequentially the evolution of this amyloid deposition over different periods of time. So one important thing that we realize about these advanced techniques is that unlike the routine CT and MRI, this requires a lot of pre-processing. And that includes things like denoising, inhomogeneity. I'll be coming to all of these subsequently. So one of the important things is this standard pre-processing involves denoising. So here you have the good image, which we are used to looking at, and this is a very noisy image. And there are a lot of contributing factors for that, such as resistance within the MR coils, etc. And we have various filters which are used for noise removal. So that's the first part of the pre-processing. Then the inhomogeneity correction. The whole thing about MRI is you place the patient in the magnetic field and then you run a series of sequences by changing the magnetic field. So it's important for the original magnetic field to be homogeneous, but that's easier said than done. There are always some inhomogeneities, which may be due to the main magnet, due to external ferromagnetic components surrounding the magnet or the patient himself. So that needs to be corrected, especially when you're doing the advanced MR processing. Then we have something called skull stripping. So here you see the patient has got this dark band, which is the skull, and then the scalp around it. And all this does not really contribute to our image diagnosis. So we need to do the skull stripping, which is done again through dedicated software. And then we have something called registration. So I think you've all been familiar with the fact that many times we are comparing the cases and the controls. Now, no two patients are alike as far as the brain morphology is concerned. So sometimes we tend to register all the brains onto a standard template, and very popularly this MNI, the Montreal Neurological Institute template, is used. The other time you need to do a registration is if you're wanting to register the PET image onto an MRI image, etc. So here we have a patient of TBI. We had done the MR study and the PET study. And here we fuse the MR and the PET images. We don't have a standalone PET, it's a PET CT. So we also fused the PET image to the CT image, which was generated. And then we have something called intensity standardization. Like you want to compare the data between two patients, but you can clearly see that the intensity of the image is very different between patient 1 and 2. So you need to standardize it so that they become comparable for you to proceed further. And something called D-oblique, that is, here we have the brain. Now, the entire MRI and CT is acquired in the form of slices of different parts of the brain. So in which direction are you orienting your slices? It may be like this in one patient, and if it's like this in another patient done on another scanner in another institute, you would like to have them both to be in the same way. So that correction is another important thing. And then we have something called segmentation. As I showed you, we have the whole brain, which has got the CSF within it, the cerebrospinal fluid. And if you just want to see the white matter, let's say you want to know only the white matter volume, then you need to segment it in such a way that you get only the white matter data. Or if you only want to study the gray matter, then you use a gray matter mask. So we have standard softwares which can do that. And similarly, that was for structural MRI. And now similarly, you have a series of steps for functional MRI as well. So the pre-processing is very intricate. So just to give you a summary of the advanced neuroimaging, that unlike the CT and basic structural MRI, you have an extensive amount of pre-processing which you need to do. And as a result of that, it is a thing which is generally reserved to the research arena and not into the clinical arena. So the big question is that can AI translate these research tools into the routine clinical arena? So I can see it's already 5, and I think I have a huge number of slides on AI, but I would just like to know whether I should wind up now or, yeah. So I think maybe I had a lot of slides on AI, but I think we're already, just crossing the time. So maybe we can do that some other time. So, but yes, there are a lot of challenges when you're trying to use AI in the TBI population, although it has cut inroads into various other parts of neurological evaluation of the brain. So one important thing is about the heterogeneity in TBI population. Many times when you're dealing with a brain tumor or something like a dementia, you have a very classical pattern which emerges as far as patient pathology is concerned. Whereas when it comes to TBI, it's very heterogeneous in terms of the injury mechanism, the severity, the duration, and the pre-morbid demographic, psychological, and biological factors. And there is a huge heterogeneity in the methodology, both in terms of the data acquisition protocol and the data processing. So there are some important challenges which we need to take into consideration before we really incorporate AI into the overall processing algorithm. We'll discuss that probably some other time. But I think some useful things would be to use multicentric data on large data sets, not just one data set from one institution. Using multimodal data that is not just limiting to one modality like MRI, but maybe go on for PET and CT, etc. Then we just don't restrict to imaging, but if you need to know the patient's information in toto, then you need to combine the imaging data with his clinical, biochemical, and probably genomic data as well. And if we're able to do all this, then probably we could develop biomarkers for diagnosis, prognostication, and treatment monitoring, not just in TBI, but in a host of pathologies. And I think this is something which is very important to me. The ultimate clinical verification of a diagnostic or predictive AI tool would require a demonstration of its value on patient outcome. It's not just enough to know how well it performs. It's important for us to know how does this change the management and thereby influence the patient outcome. So, I mean, that was the question with which we started. Can it be translated into the TBI setting, into the clinical arena? And yes, there is a lot of hope and scope for that. At the same time, I would also like to caution that it's a tool which is meant to augment but not replace a physician's judgment. And it's critical to integrate it into clinical practice without harming clinical expertise in the benefit of the patient. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. It's very insightful, and there are a lot many things to be learned now. So definitely we have to catch up again and with understanding the things where the AI can help us, all of us out. So thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Papu, you there?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for the kind presentation. I would hand over to Dr. Animesh, sir, for his vote of thanks. Animesh, hand over to you.
Thank you, Babu. It's been such an honor to be a part of this wonderful event. On behalf of the organization, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed guest, Suresh, Sunita Verma ma'am, Aurobindo sir, Achal sir, and Maria ma'am. Thank you so much for being with us. And the session is ending now. Please connect tomorrow at the same time on the same link. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.